Sir, this area is for distinguished guests. I'm going to have to ask you to move. The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of impatient authority that only youth can truly muster. It sliced through the humid South Carolina air, thick with the smell of salt water and freshly cut grass. Samuel Croft didn't turn right away. His gaze remained fixed on the sprawling parade deck of Paris Island. Thousands of new Marines, ramrod straight in their dress blues, stood as a single, magnificent entity. Among them, somewhere in the 3rd Platoon of Echo Company, was his grandson, Leo. After all these years, the sight still stirred something deep within him, a phantom echo of discipline, of purpose, of a life lived on the razor's edge. His own graduation had been on this very ground, a lifetime ago. The son felt the same, but the world was a different place. He was a different man. Sir, did you hear me? The voice was closer now, its owner stepping into Samuel's peripheral vision. A captain, young, no older than 30, with a jaw so square it looked like it had been carved from granite, and a uniform so crisp it could have cut glass. The name on his uniform read Hayes. Samuel finally turned, his movements slow and deliberate, the way a river moves when it nears the sea. His eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear in a face mapped with the deep lines of 84 years, met the captain's. He wore a simple, faded brown jacket against the morning chill, its zipper worn and its cuffs frayed. He looked, to anyone who cared to glance, like a man who had wandered away from a local retirement home and gotten lost. "I hear you, Captain." Samuel's voice was quiet, a low rumble like distant thunder. "I'm just trying to see my boy." He gestured with a slight nod toward the formation. "My grandson." Captain Hayes's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Samuel, from his worn shoes to his thin, white hair. The assessment was swift and brutal. This old man did not belong here, in the reserved section with the colonels, the visiting dignitaries, and their polished families. "I appreciate that, Grandpa, but the general seating is on the other side of the field. This section is reserved. You understand what reserved means, don't you?" The condescension was a physical thing, an oily film that coated the air between them. Samuel felt a familiar stillness settle over him, the same calm he'd once found in the heart of a firefight. He had faced down men with knives, with guns, with ideologies that promised death, all with less arrogance than this young officer. He simply nodded. "I understand, but the view is better from here. I'm old. My eyes aren't what they used to be." "That's not my problem," Hayes snapped, his patience, already thin, evaporating completely. "The rules are the rules. Now, are you going to move, or am I going to have to get the MPs to escort you? We're trying to maintain a certain standard here today." He gestured around at the gleaming shoes and decorated uniforms, then back at Samuel's simple attire, leaving the insult to hang in the air. Samuel didn't reply. He just looked at the captain, his expression unreadable. This quiet defiance seemed to infuriate Hayes more than any argument could have. The captain's face tightened, his neck flushing a dull red. He saw the old man's silence not as dignity, but as senile stubbornness. "All right, that's it. Let's go, old-timer." Hayes took a step forward and wrapped his fingers around Samuel's upper arm. The grip was firm, meant to intimidate, to propel. But the moment the captain's hand closed on his bicep, the world tilted on its axis for Samuel Croft. It wasn't the pressure, the young man was strong, but Samuel had endured far worse. It was the touch, the sudden, uninvited grip of authority, the feeling of being controlled, of being moved against his will. The bright, manicured green of the parade deck dissolved. The sounds of the Marine Corps band faded into a dull roar. The salty air was suddenly thick and cloying, heavy with the scent of mud and decay and fear. He was no longer in South Carolina. He was back in the jungle, deep in a place that wasn't on any map. Rain was dripping from the canopy above, each drop a tiny, cold shock against his skin. The hand on his arm wasn't covered in a dress-white glove. It was grimy, calloused, and held the cold steel of a rifle muzzle against his ribs. The man holding him was whispering threats in a language he understood just enough to know he was about to die. In that moment, his training took over. Every muscle in his body went slack, yet remained coiled with potential energy. Stillness was a weapon, patience a shield. You don't fight the current, you wait for it to present an opening. He had waited then, for a fraction of a second, for his captor to shift his weight, and then he had moved. He blinked. The jungle receded. The crisp uniform of Captain Hayes swam back into focus. He hadn't moved a muscle, but the memory, vivid and violent, had blazed through him in less than a heartbeat. He looked at the captain's hand on his arm, then back up into the young man's angry eyes. Samuel's own gaze was perfectly calm, but something in it, a depth, a cold, ancient knowledge of violence, made Hayes falter. For the first time, the captain felt a flicker of uncertainty. This old man wasn't scared. He wasn't even angry. He was waiting. As Hayes pulled at Samuel's arm with more force, the sleeve of the worn jacket slid up a few inches. The movement exposed the skin of his forearm, and with it, a tattoo. It was old, the ink faded from a deep black to a hazy, bluish-gray, the lines blurred by decades of sun and age. It wasn't a standard eagle, globe, and anchor. It wasn't a girl's name or a date. It was a skull, eyeless and stark, superimposed over a five-pointed star, with a serpent coiled around it. It was a symbol that meant nothing to 99.9% of the people on this planet. "I'm not going to tell you again," Hayes said, his voice a low growl, trying to recover his bravado. But his words were lost to the wind. A shadow fell over them. "Captain Hayes." The voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of command like a physical force. It wasn't a shout, but it made both men freeze. Hayes immediately dropped his hand from Samuel's arm and spun around, snapping to a rigid position of attention. Standing before them was General Morrison, the four-star general commanding all Marine Corps training, the guest of honor for the day's events. He was a mountain of a man, his chest a billboard of valorous decorations, his face a stern mask of leadership. His aide stood a respectful pace behind him. "General, sir." Hayes barked out, his face pale. "This man was in a restricted area, sir. I was just escorting him to the proper seating." General Morrison's eyes, chips of gray flint, barely registered the captain's explanation. They were fixed on Samuel. He started to give Hayes a curt nod, a silent order to handle it, but then his gaze dropped. It fell to Samuel's forearm, to the faded blue-gray ink that had just been revealed. The general froze. It wasn't a gradual stop. It was a full, system failure halt. His breath hitched in his chest. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, shocked pallor. His aide, seeing the look on his superior's face, took a half-step forward in concern, but the general raised a hand, stopping him without a word. The world seemed to shrink, the sounds of the band, the murmuring crowd, the crisp commands from the parade deck, all fading into a distant hum. There was only the general and the old man in the worn jacket, and the tattoo that bridged the 50 years between them. General Morrison slowly, almost reverently, took a step closer. He looked from the tattoo to Samuel's clear blue eyes, a storm of disbelief and awe raging in his own. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a choked whisper, utterly stripped of its command authority and filled with something else entirely, something close to worship. "It can't be," he breathed. He looked at the tattoo again, as if to confirm it was real. The eyeless skull, the star, the serpent, the unit insignia for MACVSOG's Spike Team Dakota, he said, the words sounding like a prayer from a forgotten religion. "They told us you were all gone, that none of you made it back from that last run." Captain Hayes stared, his mouth hanging open, utterly lost. MACVSOG. That was ancient history, special forces stuff from Vietnam. What did that have to do with this confused old man? The general ignored him completely. His eyes were locked on Samuel's. "The ghost," he whispered, the name barely audible. "The ghost of the A Shao Valley. We read the redacted files at Lejeune. We studied your operations. We were told they were embellished, that no single man could have done what the reports said you did." He took another step, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of Samuel. And then, in full view of hundreds of Marines, their families, and his own command staff, the four-star general, a man who commanded legions, brought his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his hand to his brow in the slowest, most precise, most heartfelt salute of his entire life. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated reverence. He wasn't saluting a civilian. He was saluting a legend he thought was long dead. "Sir," General Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes shining. It is an honor I never thought I would have in my lifetime." The silence that followed was absolute. People in the nearby stands had turned to watch, drawn in by the sight of a four-star general saluting a disheveled old man. Captain Hayes looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His mind struggled to connect the dots. The frail grandpa he had been manhandling, the old-timer he had threatened to have arrested, was being saluted by one of the most powerful men in the Marine Corps. Samuel Croft simply looked at the general, a flicker of sad recognition in his eyes. He gave a slow, tired nod. "It's been a long time, General," he said, his voice still quiet. "I go by Samuel now." The general held his salute, his arm trembling slightly with the force of his emotion. He finally turned his head, his flinty eyes locking onto the petrified Captain Hayes. His voice dropped, becoming lethally cold. "Captain, what is your name?" "Hayes, sir. Captain Robert Hayes," he stammered, his body rigid with fear. "Captain Hayes," the general began, his voice dangerously low. "You have your hands on a living Medal of Honor recipient. A man whose real name is so classified that it's still redacted in the official archives. A man who single-handedly held off an entire NVA battalion for 3 nights to protect a downed pilot. A man this country left for dead because no one believed he could possibly survive." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush the young captain. "That downed pilot," the general continued, his voice cracking slightly, "was my father." A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered. Captain Hayes's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He felt the ground fall away beneath him. He looked at Samuel, at the old man's steady, forgiving eyes, and saw not a feeble senior citizen, but a titan, a ghost from the pages of history, standing right there in front of him. "This man," the general boomed, his voice now regaining its full command, projecting to everyone within earshot, "is not a guest. He is not a visitor. He is a shrine. This ground he walks on is hallowed because he is on it. His presence here honors us. Captain, do you understand that?" "Sir, yes, sir," Hayes choked out, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. I didn't know. Sir, I am so sorry." He turned to Samuel, his eyes pleading. "Sir, my deepest apologies." Samuel raised a hand, stopping him. The gesture was simple, but it carried an undeniable authority. "The boy was doing his job, General," Samuel said, his voice calm and even. He saw an old man who looked out of place. He was protecting the decorum of the ceremony. There's no fault in that. This act of grace, this quiet, immediate forgiveness, was more devastating to Captain Hayes than any reprimand could have been. It highlighted the chasm between his own petty pride and the monumental character of the man he had just disrespected. From the edge of the formation, a young Marine broke rank and ran toward them. It was Leo. The graduation ceremony had just concluded, and he had seen the entire exchange. He rushed to his grandfather's side, his face a mixture of confusion, concern, and burgeoning awe. "Grandpa, what's going on? Are you okay?" he asked, looking from his grandfather to the general and back again. He had always known his grandfather was a Marine, but Samuel never talked about it. He said he'd been a mechanic, worked on engines. He spent his days fixing lawnmowers in his small workshop and telling terrible jokes. He was just, "Grandpa." Samuel smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his clear eyes. He placed a gnarled hand on Leo's shoulder, the same hand that had once held a rifle with deadly precision. "I'm fine, Leo. Just fine. I was just meeting an old colleague's son." General Morrison finally lowered his salute, though his posture remained one of deep respect. He looked at Leo, then at Samuel. "Your grandfather is the finest Marine I have never had the honor of serving with," he said to the young man. "Everything you have learned here, everything you aspire to be, he is the living embodiment of it. Honor, courage, commitment." He then turned his attention back to the crowd. "I want everyone to hear this," he called out, his voice resonating across the field. He gestured for Samuel to join him on the reviewing stand. Hesitantly, Samuel complied, walking with the slow, steady gait of a man who was in no hurry. He stood beside the general, looking out at the sea of new Marines, his grandson among them. The general recounted the story, his voice filled with a passion that captivated every person present. He spoke of a secret war, of men who fought without recognition, who died without glory. He spoke of Spike Team Dakota and their final, impossible mission to rescue a high-value pilot from a heavily fortified prison camp deep in enemy territory. He described how the mission went wrong, how the team was ambushed, and how one man, their leader known only as the Ghost, ordered the survivors to fall back while he provided cover. He told them how that man held out for 72 hours, alone, against overwhelming odds, buying the time for the rescue of the pilot, before his position was finally overrun. He had been declared killed in action, awarded the nation's highest honor in a secret ceremony, his name sealed away forever. "We believed he was a ghost for 50 years, the general concluded, his voice ringing with emotion. But he is here today. He is with us. A ripple of applause started, then swelled into a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. The new Marines, their families, the officers on the stand. Everyone was on their feet, their applause a roaring tribute to the quiet old man in the worn brown jacket. Leo stood beside his grandfather, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the depth of the silence his grandfather had carried all these years. Later, after the crowds had thinned, Samuel sat on a bench with Leo. Captain Hayes approached them, his hat in his hands, his face a mask of profound shame. "Sir," he said to Samuel, his voice barely a whisper, "there's nothing I can say to excuse my behavior. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I failed to see the man in front of me. I only saw the clothes he was wearing." Samuel looked up at him, his pale blue eyes holding no malice. "A uniform doesn't make a man, Captain," he said softly. "It just tells you what job he does. The man is inside. Sometimes you have to look a little harder to see him. You're a young officer. You have a long career ahead of you. Learn from this. Learn to see the person, not the rank or the uniform. That's where true strength lies." He patted the bench beside him. "Sit down, son. Tell me about yourself." As the sun began to set over the island, casting long shadows across the parade deck, an unlikely trio sat together, a living legend, a brand-new Marine, and a humbled young captain who had just learned the most important lesson of his life. They didn't talk about war or medals. They talked about family, about the future, and about the quiet dignity that binds all generations of service together. The greatest heroes are often the ones you'd never notice, the quiet souls who carry the weight of the world without complaint, their valor hidden not by secrecy, but by a profound and unshakable humility. They walk among us every day, waiting only for us to have the wisdom to see them. If this story reminds you of the quiet heroes in your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that honor the unseen giants who walk among us.